سعيد وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. We are coming to you live from our studios here in Sunny Hill, Johannesburg, this beautiful Friday evening. Yeah, we are into September, good spring weather, nice and warm. Let's hope that the weather holds into the weekend so that we could have a good, enjoyable weekend in the midst of a lot of chaos in the country and a lot of concern, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger as well. We've had the violence attributed to xenophobia, gender-based violence, the crime stats that were released telling us a very grim story about South Africa being at war with itself. But no matter how bad the picture may be, we have to ask ourselves the question, where to from here? What do? We can't be defeatist. We can't just sit back and say, well, it is what it is, and let's wait for things to get worse or get better. We have to take up the struggle and see what we can do to make it better. I know we do a lot of talking, but talk we must, because that is the first step. Joining us in studio this evening on the program, we have Adil Chibaleng. He's been with us on the program before. He's with Transform RSA. He's also with the African People's Convention. I think the last we spoke to him was just before the election when we were doing party profiles. Adil, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome once again to the program.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum salam.
How did you guys do in the elections? I think 0.11%, something like that. Were you satisfied relatively?
No, we didn't even reach 11%. I mean, the whole elections, according to our view, it was a rigged election. There was no literally formal election. People went to the polls and did what they needed to do for electing leadership, but the outcome of the results had no reflection of whatsoever that happened on the ground. They just literally disregarded the ballot boxes and the polls, and they went and allocated political parties seats, unfortunately. And there was a huge uproar anyway. It was an international event where political parties, 38 of them, decided that this is not a fair and free election. And they declared it so. And afterwards, it was really made peace to say, just let the process go by. But the current election was not really contested. It was just an awarded numbers so that they can actually keep the status quo. That is why we're having such a crisis in the country, is because from the fundamental root of our systems, institutionally, if IEC, as an independent electoral commission, is not independent, what else is actually already influenced?
When you say they, who do you mean? That they allocated numbers?
Look, it was a very strange system in a sense that the IEC was at the center of this whole debacle. And people involved in terms of balloting process, of allocation of ballot numbers, the actually handing out of particular numbers to political parties. It was not based on numbers trickling in on counts of votes. No, they totally just took the registers and started doing discrepancy issues around it. Jipoing numbers, putting numbers in, and there was a disjuncture between the provincial as well as counting centers with regards to the what IEC was doing itself on an independent basis. So the whole thing was really like a collapsed, really election process.
Were you challenged legally by these 38 parties?
Look, the parties decided not to go forward with the challenge. It was already raised, IEC knows, and the matter was raised up formally, and letters were actually communicated within the 48 hours before the final, handing out of the election results. But it was then realized that, look, for the stability of this country, there is no need to really be hustling it further than what was raised. The issues were raised. 38 parties indicated that they were dissatisfied with the election results and the way it was actually allocated. It was not fair, it was not free, it was not an indication of how people voted. We have people still calling us today and saying, how did you allow for our votes to be stolen? People went in and did even audit reading of saying, I voted in this area with my family, with my cousins, with my people, as well as community, yet our votes were not even reflected. So That was a situation that we made peace with. And that is why we said this was not a free, nor was it a fair election, nor was it a really open contestation.
What is a party like the African People's Convention, which according to the stats say you got 0.11%, you didn't make it to the National Assembly? What do you do between elections? Do you go restart the whole process again? How does it work for parties that don't make it to parliament?
Look, the parties that don't make it to parliament, you restart all over. It's a waste of money, time and effort. And it's really actually a robbery on a grand scale. It's like a heist. I mean, you spend this amount of money on an equal platform, equal basis with everybody, and you come out of the election having wasted money, effort, time, resources, a whole lot of things. And you just have to walk away and actually wave the process goodbye. And then you restart again for the next upcoming election. So the whole thing about the independency of our electoral commission system is not there. It's a total flop. It's a flaw. And we're living in a country as peaceful people. And from the peaceful perspective, it was then decided to say, look, let this process run forward. And we will catch it on the next ride. Right. When it comes, we will deal with it thoroughly and properly and give leadership on those bases.
If we look at where we are currently, right, elections have come and gone. Ramaphoria is evaporated. It doesn't exist any longer. The very people who thought that, he had a magic wand are now looking for someone to do some magic on him. But anyway, what's your analysis of the recent violence attributed to xenophobia, gender-based violence, crime stats? Is there a common root cause that we can look at?
There is a common root cause. There's an increase from 20,000 to 21,500 odd numbers of South African deaths in terms of crime stats. There's an increase in terms of robberies, house, business. There's an increase in terms of hijacks. There's an increase in terms of fraudulent, crimes and all of those things that are showing that South Africa, instead of improving, I mean, the stats, even when you read the minister's speech on how they would classify there is an decrease of crime. I mean, it's a whole hogwash where you actually have to confuse people in such a context that you tell them there is a decrease in an increase, and then there is an increase in a decrease, where it's actually a PR, really badly written statements, most of it, where we are sitting with a problem. One, the issue of violence, violent crimes, violent killings, as well as the lawlessness in South Africa is something that is totally unacceptable. Related to that comes in the secondary factor. South Africans on the ground right now, most of the professionals I've spoken to, most of the common people I've spoken to are saying we've had enough as South Africans. We always at the last of the line for everything. People come into the country, they come in illegally, undocumented, have no proper residency, have no proper citizenship, are given all forms of facilities and services, are given preferences in terms of jobs because they're undocumented, so they don't have recourse for complaints. They are not South African, which means they don't have a political interest in South Africa's growth. So they will do whatever it takes to order to get forward. So they are not even sympathetic to the socio-economic conditions of the people living in South Africa and the struggles that people are fighting. You go to the next layer, you have now massive amount of crimes related to undocumented people in South Africa who are currently occupying very, very luxury positions in terms of businesses from drugs, businesses from trafficking, human trafficking, kidnappings, prostitution, running hijacking of trucks, running illegal scams, doing all sorts of crimes in South Africa. And people are saying we've had enough. So what you see at the xenophobic level, it is actually a louder cry for a recognition of a real problem that exists. And for the first time, there was no longer just a xenophobic view, but it was now a crime-related xenophobic violence, where people are saying we have certain nationalities who are non-South African nationalities, who are causing mayhem in communities, and we want to deal with those issues. And how do we deal with it is we confront the people, we confront the situation, because the law enforcement situation has broken down. The president only came out yesterday, I think today. He met up with the taxi communities, giving condolences to one of the taxi drivers that was killed, and trying to reach out to 2 weeks down the line when there's already been a crisis and the whole thing has heated up to a point where it's collapsed on its own, and you're intervening.
What do you make of the argument made by Malema and others? They saying that if people are angry because of a scarcity of resources, then the anger is misplaced because these foreigners, if you call them that, are trying to eke out a living. They're also coming from impoverished backgrounds. Yes, there may be some amongst them who get involved in crime, but then there are many local South African citizens who also get involved in crime. And they're saying, target your anger at white monopoly capital. They are the minority that have control over the majority of the resources of the country. Don't target it on fellow Africans who come from very impoverished backgrounds.
Look, it's devoid of really basic logic and knowledge. You cannot expect a person at the level of Alexander who interacts at the level of Alexander Township and community and within the parameters of that environment to be able to can articulate a crisis that is happening at the Johannesburg Stocks Exchange of people taking the country ransom. They don't have that access and knowledge. So when you see masses are not sitting in Sandton in Johannesburg Stock Exchange, they're sitting in townships and communities. So the masses reaction is not going to be an elite reaction or a organized professionals or an organized community that understands the root cause of problems. So what we do is continuously misdiagnose. Currently, people in Alexander are affected by ordinary issues like drugs, like nyaope, like prostitution, issues of illegal, people selling illegal goods who are in their neighborhood. They see people right on their street corners who are drug dealers selling to their own ordinary fellow people, families and everything. So when they retaliate there, we as leaders, we misdiagnose the issue. And we then say it's a broader generalized target white monopoly capital. Wonderful, but who knows how the extent of what monopoly capital does in terms of the damage as well as the causing of chaos within the South African economy. So a lot of it is misdiagnosis. And unfortunately, Malema knows so much and so little as well in terms of the real context of issues. The context of issues is at community level, people are affected. It's their lives, it's their children who are on Naope, it's their daughters who are on prostitution, it's their little boys who are raped, it's their communities that is actually violated. Is it correct
for them to blame primarily foreigners for all of those ills?
Forget the issue of foreigners. They've been tackling crime at the level of people actually committing crimes. They didn't go to like what happened in Rwanda on the mass genocide of saying we are going for a Congolese community and we're shutting it down. No. They said, we know there's a Congolese individual. We know there's South African police involved here. We know there is community members who are Alexander-based.
They were just going at random, targeting businesses that are
Isn't it amazing? Businesses that are South African, businesses that are foreign owned, businesses that are locally, established, Shoprite, Ackermans, all of them are South African companies. So the issue is no longer, we cannot hide it anymore around xenophobia, and then pretend that we don't have a problem.
So you're saying it's more nuanced than that?
It's a nuance because people don't understand that communities react on the basis of what is actually a thorn in their foot.
We'll just stop there for a while. We take our first commercial break. When we come back, we continue the discussion with Adil in Chibaleng. Welcome back. So where to from here? We are a country in crisis. There's no denying that. But how do we diagnose the problem? Where's the misdiagnosis? What are the options going forward? In studio, we have from Transform RSA, Adil in Chibaleng. He's also with the African People's Convention. And prior to the break, we were speaking about the recent incidents of violence and the whole aspect and debate around xenophobia. The crime stats. Now, you would hear the experts tell you and the politicians tell you as well that, look, it has a lot to do with inequality. It has to do with the legacy of apartheid. We come from a violent past. But in your opinion, why is there so much of violence that accompanies the crime in this country?
Look, the violence at this stage is still unexplained. One is they can't even explain as to who is committing the violence. There's 21,500 murders happening in South Africa. There are not 21,000 murderers or more than that in prison, convicted and arrested today. So what does it tell us? We have a crisis in terms of law enforcement. We have a crisis in terms of identification of who are the perpetrators of this crime. And we have a crisis in terms of the whole crime statistics and crime intelligence. I mean, if we had a very strong country in South Africa which had a policing system that worked on crime intelligence, CIS type of a thing where they could do like really hectic forensics, where they could go into deep forensic for crime and crime analysis and crime diagnosis, and seeing what are the causes, what are the root issues, what needs to be done in order to be preventative. Right now, there is not much of it. I mean, you know the state of our own police stations in South Africa. They are literally crime scenes themselves. I mean, they are so broken down that you cannot even have confidence. I mean, we just do it for the sake of it. Secondary, you come to the systems. The police are not capacitated. They are not trained well. They are not even given the basic necessities, And worst of all is the system picks up the worst of the society, and they give them jobs in the policing so that they just have something to do. So people who are not trained, develop skilled, given the opportunity, and even empowered. Police today and pittance, they don't have housing. They get something like less than 900 housing allowance. They don't have proper, car allowance or anything. Then they become now victims of the same thing that we're running away from as a society, which is crime. They now become perpetrators because they have to take favors in order to have an extended income in their whole thing. So that's what happens. That's why they say police are involved in this process. And even during the current xenophobia, outbreaks of, people coming down and saying we're really disinterested in communities being crime-ridden as well as drug-infested, they found that police were involved. They arrested, I think, about 14 police in the whole process. So the crisis we're sitting with is a crisis of leadership. You have porous borders here. Every border, whether it's an airport, whether it is a checkpoint border, at a border control, at the boundaries of the country, you have people just moving in and out goods. At one point, I saw a bakkie dragging another bakkie behind on a trailer. The bakkie was covered with Zimba chips packets. And in there was a bakkie inside. I mean, this whole country is a crime scene on its own. What do you do to resolve it? It's back to leadership. We have people who are currently extremely trained. They came from the veterans in the liberation struggle. Half of them are not working, if not 80% of them are unemployed. These people were trained militarily. They were trained in terms of intelligence. They were trained in terms of electronics technology, all sorts of things. They are not even at our borders protecting. They should be the guardians of the country. They should be sitting there as the real green berets who are giving integrity to guarding the sovereignty which we call South Africa. They are unemployed. They don't have houses. They are not properly cared for, in terms of healthcare. So it's a real mess. There is no leadership. Anybody else who claims there is some form of leadership is because they have to keep a job and have to keep lying in order to keep the facade of saying something is happening. But in this country which we are in today, there is a broken down system which we need to literally rebuild. And the reforms that are needed are going to have to be rapid, are going to have to be extremely aggressive, and they are going to be really radical in a way that needs to be done. But there is really right now no template, no interest. The ruling party is completely gone silent, and they only go out on the basis that they are under a severe pressure. They only met with the local taxi owners a day ago or today, just in order to make peace on the taxi side.
What does the citizenry do, right? I think everyone would agree with you that we need reforms, we need rapid reforms, we need to address these issues positively and aggressively. Elections have gone, right? So you got to live now with this ruling party for at least another 5 years. That part of the political status quo remains unless something very out of the ordinary happens. So in this next 5 year period, what should the citizens of the country do? The reason I ask this is because I'm hearing this call. It's time for citizens to take control of their destiny. You can't rely on government, you can't rely on police. What should citizens be doing?
There's a lot of citizens, civil society groupings, forums, organizations, associations that have already started. What you saw in terms of the drugs cleanup, what you saw in terms of the taxi owners and drivers, activism happening, it's part of the cleanup process. Humans are such that as long as the authority that is perceived to be in charge fails, by their own design, they will come up with their own mechanisms of sorting it out. So it will either become really a wild, wild west environment whereby people will take laws and it will be really a jungle government, or you would have a government or a state and the ruling party that is actually decisive about what it needs to do and how it's going to intervene and what are the steps to take in order to ensure that this stops now. I mean, the problems are so huge that they have not even started to even scratch the surface. 21,500 murders happening. Does it make sense? Which means we're having over 58 to 60 murders on a given day.
That's really ridiculous. We only have 24 hours, yet we have 58 murders happening in 24 hours. So something is not there. Something is not cooking. Every hour, every 30 minutes, there is a murder in South Africa. That on its own should make us have sleepless nights. That on its own should be worrying us that the minute I step outside my house, I'm already a target to something. The minute I'm in my house, I'm already a target anyway.
I want to put something on the table as a point, as a discussion point, right? Many would look at this with raised eyebrows. They'll think, how can this even come up for discussion? But I've been hearing this come from some quarters, this concept of a benevolent dictator. There are those who say that the democratic system in a situation like this, the chances of it working is very unlikely. If you look at the various political formations, the major ones at least, each one of them have got the internal squabbles, factions, coalition politics not working in the metros. What would your response be? Because it may sound desperate, it may be desperate, but on ground level, people are talking about this, that we need a benevolent dictator.
It's correct. At any system, you know it, rules are rules. And that's what dictates. So if South Africa is to come right, it's going to need a very strong hand. Whichever that hand is, there must be no tolerance to anything. But unfortunately, the current political scheme and setup, they're all compromised. They're all caught up in a situation where on the one hand, they would wish to, but on the other hand, they are prevented because there is vested conflicting interests in terms of coming up and rising up to meet the challenge. So you don't have a solution, and that is why the system outcome out of what we spoke about, the IEC, was designed. The IEC produced a current lame duck leadership that we're sitting now, people sitting in parliament, who are not even debating the current hot issues of what is happening today. If you had had a true reflection of what the people are saying on the ground, those 38 parties should have been in parliament today. All of them vying for the interest to correct the mess in this country, and all of them should have been coming up and rising up with key critical solutions. Politics in South Africa is about opposition. You say something, I oppose you for the sake of opposition, not to build the nation, not to help us literally construct what we want to see as the South Africa we deserve to live in. A beautiful country, prosperous, economically vibrant, creating an environment that enables everybody to thrive in it. Creating an environment where the land issue, the land question is resolved and the land is restored back to its original inheritors, like it is the case for everybody fighting. Palestinians are fighting for their land that has been annexed by Israel, similar to what is South Africa going through. Because our cause is we don't have an occupier who sits with a gun in your face, does not mean we have not lost our land. So the issues are still fundamental. We want political freedom. There was no independence. There was no the proper restitution of retaining back the wrongs and the ills of what happened in the pre-colonial era, during the colonial era, during apartheid. There was no redress. So a lot of issues will not be resolved unless a strong leader emerges. Male, female, it doesn't matter. That individual must understand that they are going to have to become selfless. They are going to have to become positioned on the aspect of saving the nation. This leadership of our crest class of political leaders whose interest is living the highest of lifestyle, drinking themselves the best of whiskeys and wines and whatever, dining up as if they have never seen food before in their lives, cannot sustain. It's not going to be sustainable anymore.
I think everyone would agree with you about strong leadership. The question that flows from there is who? And the reason I ask this question is that people will say Ramaphosa has his shortcomings, but he is perceived to be the best bet within the ANC. Even if you look at the larger political formations, Maimane is perceived to be highly compromised within his own party. Malema's got all these issues to deal with at courts and VBS and what. So is there a name, or is there at least a handful of names that we can look at to say these are the people that we can look to as a country that will provide that strong leadership?
Look, the ANC has over 700,000 members. Do you want to tell me there's not one single individual in that 700,000 that has basic capabilities to just say, I'm going to be selfless, I'm going to be a patron, I'm going to be a patriotic person, leader who's not interested in much? I mean, this is the issue of who emerges is not really the case. We're not an issue of the most redundant of nation and people. 56 million people. In 156 million, we can't even pick up an individual who can articulate a very clear position and say, guys, let's reset this madness now.
I'm asking to you, who's one who stands out that you would have?
Right now, among the political parties, they can't because they're compromised. And most of them think somebody is in charge. That's why they're always waiting for a response from somewhere. You know, it's either England or Britain, wherever they come and take decisions from, or it's the US or somebody from wherever, because they're always waiting for somebody to tell them what to be done. And yet the leadership is currently available. We've got the best experts in South Africa, professionals. We've got the best of everything. I mean, the streets are clean, even in the current crisis we're living in. You know, so there is no shortage of kind people who are clear, even from the spiritual basis of it. But the constitution, the way it's structured, it's not enabling. It does not give you the benevolent dictatorship model of saying a leader must emerge, and in that leadership, it just gives you dictates of basics. What you need is somebody who knows to say, guys, we are now going to be selfless. And unfortunately, spirituality becomes critical. When you become selfless, you must have some kind of a basis that informs you. What are you here on earth for? What is your purpose for this existence? Are you here to amass your self-worth, or are you here to create the better opportunity and environment for all to live and exist in? So far, it's not that political. You know, either from the communist side of it, the socialist side of it. As Pan-Africanists, we're trying to even literally scratch that hardest surface of defining what should be from a Pan-Africanist point of view, with socialism coming from the origin of Africanism, where we lived to share. The most bravest, the most selfless, the most self-care, the most self-effacing and caring among us becomes the best leader that emerges, that gives light to all of us. That is not even happening. You can't find it in any model of that. So there are very handful of people who, if they are nurtured properly, can actually emerge. I know for a fact that I know young people, I know really some seasoned people, but they'll never see the light of the day. Because why? They're not self-serving. They have no me interest. It is only about selflessness in their lives. So they will never be given the opportunity.
Well, what's your response to this argument that irrespective of who leads us, we need to tone down our expectations? The mess that has been inherited after the Zuma era is too gigantic. There is no magician that's going to emerge that's going to turn this around quickly. We have to be in it for the long haul.
It's an absolute lie. It took China. China is the most developed country today. It's actually surpassing most of the other developed nations. 20 years. It took the Qatars. It took the UAE, less than 10 years? To emerge, to build everybody's running to for Dubai, as well as Abu Dhabi and all of the other Emirates and Gulf countries. So the rhetoric that it is not possible, it's itself the problem. The mindset is what gives you the possibility. Within 10 years, if people have a concerted effort, you can build the most amazing things. If you are united, if you are focused, if you know what needs to be done, and you know how it needs to be done. So far, they are too locked up in old ways. We are still caught up in a constitution that gives you parameters. You're still locked up in a bureaucracy which you didn't even create. You have so much of red tape before you get to a decision. There has to be 20,000 processes that you must be compliant to. By then, the whole process is already collapsed. The empowerment of ordinary people, we have massive amount of minerals in South Africa. To explore them, to bring them to surface, to give opportunities to communities, it takes such a long time. By the time it comes, people have already tired, are gone. So it is not possible unless you come up with a real clean thinking and saying, guys, this is a clean slate. Going forward, we're going to do it in a rapid manner, in an aggressive transformation approach, in making sure whatever is available now gets exploited, gets to be put into action, and gets to be tested off. And you will know if it works or it doesn't work. Countries like South Africa is not poor. And there is no need for people to be going through and around poverty. We sleep with a lot of supermarkets filled up, a lot of warehouses. Where are these warehouses getting goods and stocks from? When people are living in poverty. So it shows you the disintegrated system of thinking about what society is all about. And we continue this trail to think that because it is always defined around capital, there is no way you can change the chessboard and redistribute accordingly. People don't want to be multimillionaires. They don't want to be millionaires. They just want to know I have a house, I have a home for my kids, I can clothe them, I can school them, and they can have a roof under their head, and they can have a meal. How difficult is that? We failed to provide the basics of it. We have experimented with an RDP model that failed. It should have been an integrated model of societies that understand that they are living for a greater purpose, and that purpose is to make sure that they are born and they die having fulfilled their life journey, which is their growth phases, and making sure that they are responsible citizens and individuals within a community, society, and a government. You need a leader of that nature who understands that.
Lastly, in the midst of all of this chaos, what light do you see at the end of the tunnel? What keeps you optimistic about this country?
Moulana, I'm very happy actually, Moulana Ravat. Why? Because for a long time we've been telling them that this is a failing model and it's not going to sustain. And they thought we were lunatics to Today we're the only lunatics that were right, actually. That the whole thing is collapsing unless you bring about change. And we have already proposed. I mean, Transformer SA has been the most outspoken, outlandish about what must happen. And now our solutions are finding a home now. Because why? We could see it from a tunnel ahead. Now that we're in a real situation, and we predicted what would happen, and we predicted it to the core. Now the opportunity is now, how do we utilize that which we put on the scale of saying what should be done in order to fast track the recovery? That's all we need to do right now. Damage limitation, fast track the recovery, make sure that things start working, and even the leaders. You can keep the ANC. They're not going to be helpful to themselves even in the next coming election or so. It's going to just become a decadence and a decade to go. But the people who are still in this country believe in a life that actually can give them ongoingness. And that ongoingness is we can reinvent who we are. We can make this country great and build it from scratch and make a country which we can all live in and be proud about. And that doesn't require too many things. It requires groups of people, entities, individuals coming together, coming up with their own solutions and saying this is how we can do it. And then approaching the society within the greater scheme, what is government or municipality or whatever, say we want to do this, we want to do it this way, give us the permission and opportunity to go forward with our work and then start doing it. And you can do it legally. We can export, we can import, we can start mining activities, we can start exporting, we can make sure that whatever we put out of the economy in terms of minerals, we can process it, we can industrialize our economy by manufacturing. All of these things are available as opportunity around the world. But you have people who are completely lost in not knowing what needs to be done. So who's going to wake them up? Unless somebody within them emerges or somebody as an alternative outside the political arrangement comes up. And I can tell you it needs to start at mushrooming level with individuals. The pressure that is put on the president is fantastic because we had said that leaders are not the solution in themselves. It's what they do to serve the nation and the society that brings about the solutions. We created this whole issue of saying everything must focus around the leaders. And most of these leaders are ordinary humans. They flow like us, they're flawed like us, and they want opportunities to be guided. So the minute we start having listening, conscious, able to say, guys, we don't know, we want to learn how to do it better, this country will change. And I can tell you that time is arriving. South Africans have had enough, and people who are in this country who are not even South Africans, they themselves have had enough, are saying, let's collaboratively work together to make this a brilliant country and a beautiful country.
All right. Sheikh Adil, as always, Jazakumullah for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to have you back soon again, inshallah.
Most definitely.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Right, viewers, we take another break. When we come back, we'll open the lines. We'll ask you on 011 086 7777. What are your thoughts on the way forward for South Africa? Welcome back. So, the title of the program this evening is South Africa, Where to From Here? In studio, we had Adil Nchabaleng. He's with the African People's Convention. They contested the election. According to a stat that I looked for on the internet, they had about 0.11% of the vote. He claims it's rigged. At the time, I remember, his party together with 30 odd other parties were making a noise, but it seemed like it was kind of resolved at the time. They saying they just allowed it to slide for peace and stability in the country. He's also with Transform RSA. Interesting views. People may not agree with all of his views, but there are some interesting views, and that's what we try and do on the program. We don't want to give you only one perspective, albeit the mainstream perspective, albeit a more popular perspective. We try and give you multiple perspectives. We try and give you a variety of perspectives, and you can make up your own mind at the end of the day. But be that as it may, those are Adil's views. What are your thoughts? I want to open the line, 011 086 7777. Where to from here for South Africa? How do you diagnose the problems? What do you feel that we as a citizenry need to do? I mean, I spoke about this last week at Masjid al-Duha. That's Coleraine Masjid in Sandton, right, where I delivered the Jummah talk. I also spoke about this a couple of weeks back when I gave the Eid al-Adha talk in Houghton. And I said it's time for us to become patriotic South Africans. There is no dichotomy between being a Muslim and being a patriot. There's no dichotomy. Islam does not forbid you from being patriotic. Now, this word patriotic or patriot also, I need to just explain it because some people misunderstand. It's not nationalism where, anything for the good of the country, whatever you need to do, you do. You become blinded, you become extreme. No. Patriotism means that you live for the greater, or you care for the greater prosperity of the country, not only your own prosperity. You want to see the country prosper, not that you only want to prosper within the country or your family or your community. You have to have love for the country as a whole. You need to want to see prosperity for the people as a whole. So that's the call I've been making, but the lines are open. I really want to hear from the viewers this evening. I know it's been a very long time since we opened the lines, because normally when we have the guests in studio, 1 hour is too short a space to be able to get through the questions and to ask them, the different things that we want to ask them and touch on. But today we have a little bit of time before we wrap up the program, and I really would like to hear from you that what do you feel we need to do? What's your perspective? What's your opinion? I wrote something for the local newspaper in Lenasia where I reside. This week's edition, Monday, it came out. And I think the title went along the lines of, it's time for us to become gutsy, patriotic South Africans. And I explained in the introduction that, listen, the country is in problems, deep problems. We can't deny that. We cannot try and trivialize or downplay or diminish what's happening in the country. It would be foolish of us. We are in trouble. We are in serious trouble. We have to acknowledge that. That's the starting point, right? You look at the violence, you look at the crime stats, you look at the economy, you look at the political instability, you look at the racism, you look at the political rhetoric. Just this morning I was doing an interview with Imran Bakas from Asri, and he writes for the Sunday Independent. You come across his writings on almost a weekly basis, and he's saying that we're now facing a real threat of the rise of fascism in South Africa, and you're seeing it the world over. Donald Trump in the White House, Boris Johnson in UK. It's become a norm these days to have these kind of extreme political ideologies, these extreme approaches to situations. So all of these things are realities, but this is not the time to become defeatist. This is not the time to become pessimists. This is definitely not the time to remain passive, reactive critics. I think as a Muslim community, in the main, we've got not our masters, but we've got our doctorate in being passive, couch potato kind of critics. Yes, this country is going to the dogs. Banana Republic, ANC is corrupt, DA can't be trusted, the EFF have lost the plot. So now, where to from here? And that's why we captioned the program, or the title of the program, exactly that. Where to from here? We know, to a large extent, we know what the problems are. They're serious problems. But where to from here? What do you need to do? And personally, I feel that it's time for the citizens of this country to take control of their own destiny. What that means and what it entails and how, I don't have all the answers. I don't think any one person has. We need to put our collective minds together and try and work it out, that where to from here. But this much I know, and I'm pretty confident in this, that as a Muslim community, we need to step up. We need to become patriotic, number one. We need to get more involved in civil initiatives. We need to show that we're not only concerned when something impacts on our own interests. And the example that I like to give is that of the land issue. And before I go into that issue, again, I want to remind you, the lines are open. I'm not sure if the number is on your screen. If not, 011 086 7777. That's 011 086 7777. Please call in. I would like to hear from you. It's all of our country, isn't it? We live here. We may be Malay in heritage, we may be Indian in heritage, some may be African in heritage, but this is our country. The Malays have been here for hundreds of years. The Indians are here for 4, 5, 6 generations. Majority of Malays have not seen the part of the world from which they originate. Indians have not seen the part of the world from which they originate. Even within Africa, there's this whole debate that those who consider themselves indigenous to South Africa, where did they originate from? Perhaps other parts of Africa. I say, وَأَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةٌ. or rather, Innal arda lillah. This is Allah's earth in the end of the day. These borders are there for administrative purposes, no doubt. And borders and rules have their place. But this is Allah's earth, and Allah has put us all on this earth in the end of the day. And we need to start looking at this situation from this perspective, where we have to tell ourselves that it's time to struggle to take control of the destiny of this country. You can't leave everything to government. They don't have the capacity, nor do they have the competency. That is just a fact. You cannot leave it to the authorities. You cannot leave it to the system. The system fails us ever so regularly. I'm not saying everything is wrong with the system. I'm not saying that the system does not work at all, that there aren't positives. They are. But in the end of the day, we have to take control of things. Is it fair? Of course it's not. It's like when we talk in our communities, if I use a very basic example, when we talk in our communities and we say, okay, the crime has increased. House burglaries, carjackings, hassling of pedestrians and that kind of thing. So what do? As a citizen, you are entitled to say that the state must look after me. I'm a tax-paying citizen. The state must make sure that the potholes are filled, the street lights are working, there's adequate security, and that I feel protected and safe. But if it's not happening, what do? You've got two options, really. To sit and complain about it, about how the state is failing in its duty, even though you're a tax-paying citizen, about the gravy train, about the corruption, about the looting, about the high life that the politicians live at our expense. Or you can say, well, it's a reality. I'm paying my tax, but it's also a reality that they're not doing anything with me. They're not doing anything for me. So therefore, let's do something for ourselves. And communities rally. And they get together a security forum, and they try and create greater safety for themselves. Let's take the caller. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Caller came, caller dropped, caller come back. So that's the point I was making, that you're entitled to ask the state to look after you from a security perspective. If they don't, you take matters into your own hand, you create your community security, and you make your environment that much more safer. That's what I mean when I say taking control of your own destiny. Ultimate control is with Allah, obviously. The other aspect, and I was making mention to that earlier on, was we cannot only react when things impact on our own interests. So take the land issue in South Africa. Irrespective of what your opinion may be, no one can deny it's an issue. It's a big issue. Where's the Muslim voice? That's the point I've been pushing through in the Eid al-Adha talk, and even the talk last week, Jummah in Senton. I've been saying, where's the Muslim voice nationally on the land debate? The only time we want to say something about land is when there's land grabs on the periphery of the localities where we live. That means that, of course, you have a right to speak when there's land grabs on the periphery of where you live. When your land is being taken or your land now is at risk, of course you have the right to speak. That is your land. And you're entitled to it as a South African according to the system and the legalities. But why is it that we only speak when our interests are at stake? We don't speak when the country's interest is at stake. And that comes to that point about being thought leaders. Islam is relevant. Islam has given us the teachings. We need to radiate the discourse with the solutions of Islam to the problems of our country. That is the greatest da'wah. The greatest da'wah is to have a voice as a Muslim community on the key issues of the day: poverty, crime, land, and radiate the discourse with the teachings of Islam. That is what we need to do. And that is the message that I've been trying to share. So the country is in deep trouble, no doubt. There is a crisis of epic proportions. Ramaphosa is at 6s and 7s. Some say yes, don't judge him too harshly. He inherited a gigantic mess. Fair enough. But the mess is so gigantic, you can see he's struggling to decide which way to move and how to maneuver. Even if his heart is in the right place, even if he's the best person from the lot, he's got his internal challenges. He's got these challenges of what do you do? These state-owned entities have become bottomless pits. But this is not the time to become pessimistic. This is the time to chin up. This is the time to take up the struggle. This is the time to fight for this country, not in the literal sense. We don't want violence, but fight meaning take up the struggle. This is the time to become patriotic, to radiate the discourse with the teachings of Islam, to say that this country has done a lot for us. We owe it to this country, that this country is worth fighting for. If we fight and struggle now, we will inshallah be the beneficiaries, and our children will also be the beneficiaries. So as gloomy as things are, where to from here? I would say it starts with a mindset shift. Become a patriotic citizen. Start caring for the greater interests. Your individual interests hinges on the collective interest. Let's take a caller quickly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum. Ji brother, quickly.
I think, from a Muslim perspective, we've actually lost the opportunity to sort of impart Islamic values in this country. And, it's not too late. And the ability for us to be able to form a Muslim party, not specifically for Muslims, but for the betterment of this country, I think is something that should be considered.
There are many who would agree with you, even those who were skeptical before. But I think after this last election, many are thinking and calling for a party that's based on Islamic values, but that would cater for the needs and interests of all.
Well, the thing is, if we are believers of in that Islam is here for the benefit of all mankind, it's the duty for us to be able to actually put that message forward.
For sure. Brother, Jazakallah so much for the call.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Interesting input. Unfortunately, now we've run out of time. I was hoping that early on we would have had more calls. But we'll leave it on that note. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك